Hey, everybody. Everybody. There's a wonderful Japanese death poem, one of my favorites. It says, "Empty-handed I entered the world, barefoot I leave it. Two simple happenings that became entangled." That's it. My coming, my going, my entering, my leaving. I use this death poem often when I'm entering into a relationship, into a patient's room. Two simple happenings. My entering, my leaving, my coming, my going. It's been a really rich few hours. 48 hours, how many are we now? Michael and Radler began by showing us the importance of being in touch with oneself so that we can communicate effectively with others. And I think Torona modeled so beautifully direct and clear interpersonal relationship. Taking in the whole room and allowing each of us to come into her life as she shared hers with us. And Rita provided us the opportunity to use our seeing, looking at art. This, by the way, is a very Zen PowerPoint. Our art and our listening to story, skills we need to enter into the personal lives of everyone we meet. Rita took us into the lives of Mark Rothko and Ruth. I thought it was fascinating. Many of us are privileged to be with people for extended periods of time. We don't have to worry about a 3-minute, 12-minute visit if we're in, as a chaplain, spiritual caregiver, and others in hospice work. We get the privilege to spend many hours with people, witnessing their journey from life into death. I think we're the fortunate ones. We get to, as Rita said last night, if we have the capacity, we get to receive, behold, and appreciate. To appreciate the mystery, the frailty, and the beauty of life, the rich tapestry of life that lies before us in each patient. Whether we're able to spend 3 minutes in relationship with a patient, or 30 minutes, 30 days, or as in the case with Ruth and Rita, 30 years, we have the honor of bearing witness to the suffering and the joys of the other, and in turn, the suffering and the joys of ourselves. We get to see the complexities and the mysteries if we're awake to the possibilities. I often write about my own personal experiences as a chaplain, and I like to also read poetry. There's lots of beautiful, beautiful poetry out there that addresses the topic of life and death. Some of it kind of sweet, and some of it maybe not so sweet. As I said, there are the complexities. I'd like to share 2 poems with you, and then maybe a story or 2. This is called Lucky by Tony Hoagland. It may be quite shocking for some of you, but as Ira instructed us to do, open your heart and breathe. Or was it open your mind and breathe? What's the difference, right? Lucky. If you are lucky in this life, you will get to help your enemy the way I got to help my mother when she was weakened past the point of saying no. Into the big enameled tub, half filled with water, which I made just right, I lowered the childish skeleton she had become. Her eyelids fluttered as I soaped and rinsed her belly and her chest, the sorry ruin of her flanks and the frayed gray cloud between her legs. Some nights, sitting by her bed, book open in my lap, while I listened to the air move thickly in and out of her dark lungs, my mind filled up with praise as lush as music, amazed at the symmetry and luck that would offer me the chance to pay my heavy debt of punishment and love, with love and punishment. Once I held her dripping wet in the uncomfortable air between the wheelchair and the tub until she begged me like a child to stop. An act of cruelty which we both understood was the ancient, irresistible rejoicing of power over weakness. If you are lucky in this life, you will get to raise the spoon of pristine, frosty ice cream to the trusting creature mouth of your old enemy. Because the taste buds at least are not broken, because there is a bond between you, and sweet is sweet in any language. This is by Marina Romani. It's called Late Summer Night, remembering Fariba, her mother. July has passed into August. Summer fog gives into the sun. Sunlight streams in her silver hair, now softly grown out since the chemo. I sit at the foot of her bed, and she offers me tea in concern for my comfort. She insists that I sample the candies and nuts that cover her table, offerings of the visitation procession. Pots of flowers mark the passage of days. And we breathe in a cocktail of lavender, rose, and carnation. From my spot on her bed, my hand senses the ice of her feet, and the fingers remember the chill from her cheek that had once been my mother's. July has passed into August. Sunlight streams through her hair, and she makes no plans for September. Two very different poems, two very beautiful in their own way, remembrances of mother. As a chaplain, it's my great privilege to meet many, 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 many people, some of them dying, some not. I first met Richie in 1988 at an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting in Manhattan on Perry Street. Once known to all us recovering drunks in New York as a down and dirty room. And back in those days, it was a no-holds-barred kind of meeting place with drag queens and hookers and actors and Wall Street executives, homeless runaways. Richie was from Hell's Kitchen. As a teen, he was a boxer, always in trouble with the cops. All the women were crazy for Richie, and some of the men too. It was the 80s, so me too. So that was back in the late 80s, and I didn't see Richie again for about 20 years. It was during my second year of chaplaincy training, and I had secured a small grant from a foundation to provide spiritual counseling at an AIDS facility in Manhattan. And one Wednesday morning after group meditation, Richie was sharing his story with me about his sobriety. He was 5 months clean at that time. And I told him that I too was in recovery. And he mentioned Perry Street, and we began exchanging war stories. and remembering sober buddies, it was then that I realized that this was Richie. I hadn't recognized him at first. How could I? His once muscular body was now showing the telltale signs of substance abuse and life on the streets. Track marks on his arms, hollow cheeks, and a piece of his left ear was missing from a prison fight. And he was now addicted to crack, having slid down the slippery slope from heroin, which was his original drug of choice. Of course, I too looked very differently from those first years of sobriety when I had hair and a mustache and a beard. Actually, now I look pretty much like I did in the 80s, except now I'm white. But there I was in this facility, with the shaved head and my robes. And there was a moment of tenderness between the two of us when we saw each other. Not recognizing each other, but seeing each other. When we realized how different our paths had become. It brought us together in such a profound way. It was an unspoken understanding that this simply was what it was. 4 years later, I was sitting with at Richie's bedside, as I had done so for an hour every day for the previous 10 days. He had gone back out on the streets. On this particular day, I had to leave. I'd been asked to speak on a panel at the United Nations, and he was barely conscious, so I kissed him on the forehead and said, "I'll be back soon." I hadn't written a word for my presentation. I figured I'd do it in the cab on the way up there. And as I arrived, my cell phone rang. It was the nurse at the residence, and she said, "Richie just died." And so I began my speech at the International AIDS Education Summit with, "I just got a phone call. Someone I have known for many years just died from AIDS-related complications." Richie would have liked that. A boxer from Hell's Kitchen, being present with a bunch of suits in the United Nations building, not separate from anything or anyone anymore. That was for Richie. I was on the psych ward in my early days of chaplaincy. Me being the kind of guy that I am, I was like, well, I want to work in an AIDS residence. I'll get the funding, don't worry. I want to go on the psych ward. It'll be fine. And one day I got a call from the unit manager, and she said, "Chodo, could you come and see this guy? You'll be perfect for him. He's catatonic. He hasn't spoken for weeks. And you're a monk, so you'll be okay with the silence. Just go sit with him. And see if you can get him out of his room." So this kid was about 23, 24. He was a student at Parsons. And I walked into the room, and there he is sitting on the bed. A really, really beautiful young man, biracial man, and but this face, these eyes, just dead in this beautiful face. And I said, "Hi, my name's Chodo, and I'm a Buddhist monk and a meditation teacher, and I'd love to meditate with you, and let's meditate." Nothing. So I sit on the bed with him, which of course, you're not really allowed to do that if you're a doctor, but as a chaplain, you can get away with all sorts of stuff. So I sit on the bed with him, talking, yakking, nothing. I slide down onto the floor, and I wait for 20 minutes. And he slides down on the floor with me. And then I begin to just sit. And then 10 minutes later, he gets up off the floor, gets into bed, and goes under the covers. And I go back the next day, and the next day, and then I bring my bell with me, and I said, "Okay, I think we'll meditate, but let's move into the cafeteria. It was like 10 o'clock in the morning, so it'll be empty, and I'll wait for you there. So for a week, I went to the cafeteria. I'll call him Justin. No Justin. Then one day, he comes shuffling into the cafeteria, sits down, and he picks up the bell, rings the bell, and we start to meditate. When he's finished, he picks up the bell, puts it down, shuffles off. This takes another week or 10 days. Now it's becoming boring and repetitious, so I think I'll read some poetry to him. This will be great, because I love poetry, and it's all about me, right? Being this great chaplain. And I'm going to fix him, and I'm going to, it's going to be great. So I start bringing all this poetry. He's biracial, Hispanic and Haitian. I think he's bound to love like Lorca and Jimenez and all these Spanish poets. And he's young, so he'll probably like, Yoko Ono and New Yorican Poet Society. So I bring all these poems, and he comes. So our thing now is he comes into the dining room every morning. He sits down, rings the bell. I read the poem. Halfway through one of my poems, he'll get up, shuffle out. And then one day I said to him, you know what, Justin, it's really rude of you to leave in the middle of my poems. I'd really like it if you could at least bow and just let me know that you're done. And he did. So my relationship with Justin lasted about 6 weeks, 2 months, and then one morning I got a call from the nurse manager, and she said they're taking him down for electroshock treatment because apparently they've done everything for him, so they figure this is the last-ditch attempt to get him back. And as it happened for him, it was miraculous. The shock treatment worked, and I got a call a couple of days later, come back to the unit, come see Justin. He wants to talk to you. Wow. So here I am with this idea of what this meeting's going to be like. Justin's tall and handsome and smart, and he's got this bound to have this incredible voice because he just looks so. So I walk into the room and I'm like, "Hey Justin, how you doing?" And he has this tiny, tiny little voice. He says, "I'm okay." One illusion shattered. I said, "Oh, well, it's great to see you in this way. It's great to see you talking. It's been such a pleasure, a real pleasure and honor working with you." I said, "Do you remember anything about what we did over the last few weeks?" He said, "Yeah." "What was the most significant thing that we did together?" I said, "Sit." I said, "Great." He said, "But can I tell you one thing?" I was like, "Yeah." He said, "You have the worst taste in poetry." Never assume. Recently, a couple of weeks ago actually, one of our Sangha members died. Evan, one of our chaplains here today, was her chaplain in Mount Sinai. A wonderful, wonderful woman, leukemia. And she'd been in remission, and then it came back. She had decided not to do any more chemo or radiation. And when Evan met her in the hospital and talked to her about our center, she said, I want to come visit. This is while she was in remission. And so she came, and we had this incredible, incredible meeting, she and I. And the first thing she asked me was, "What do you think about dying?" I said, "Well, it's a big question. What do you think about dying?" She said, I asked you first. I'm dying. You're not, right now. What do you think about dying? And I said, that's a really, really difficult question for me to answer, but why are you asking? And she said, I think I'd like you to be there. This is when I first met her. I said, okay. So a few weeks later, she went back into hospital. Evan took care of her there, her spiritual needs there. Then she came home. First she went into hospice at Bellevue, at the Haven. And she's in her room, and if any of you know the Haven Hospice at Bellevue, it's such an incredible place. It's overlooking the East River, and it's really, really beautiful if you're lucky enough to get one of those private rooms. And I'll call her Christine. Christine was sitting there, sitting in the chair, looking out of the window, and almost as though there was no one else in the room, she said, wow, I've lived on 2nd Avenue for over 20 years, and I could see this much of the East River from my apartment. Now, look at the East River. It's this big. Now that I'm dying, I could see the entire East River. That, to me, was one of the most beautiful, beautiful things I've ever heard. I could see this much of my life. And now that I'm dying, look at this. Chodo, look at this. So beautiful. That's the kind of work that I get to do all the time. That's the kind of work that I get to be witness to, that I get to be in the presence of such incredible humanness. As Ira used the word a lot, the love, just incredible love. And it's such a privilege to be here with everyone in this room, knowing that each of us are on a similar journey, no matter what we're doing as physicians or chaplains, doulas, funeral directors, teachers. This common wish, this idea that actually there is a better way to take care of our patients, whether they're 2 minutes old or 102 years old. I have one quick story I have to tell you. I was in the palliative care rounds a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about a patient. I'll call her Mrs. Romero. She's Italian. She's 102 years of age. She's back in the hospital, and the team's saying, what are we going to do with Mrs. Romero? She's back again. There's nothing wrong with her. She's 102, but she's going to live till she's 200. There's nothing wrong with her. She keeps coming in. We do the test. We give her a bed for a few days. We have to get somebody in there to talk to her, see what's going on here. So the next week, the social worker comes in and says, well, spoke to Mrs. Romero. What's going on with you, Mrs. Romero? We have to get you out of here. There's nothing wrong with you. She said, I'm 102 years of age. My sister's 100, and I hate her guts. I'm not going home to that apartment. We lived together for 100 years. You try that. I'm staying here till I die.